Now part of the Darkcast Network. Welcome to Indie Podcasts with a Dark Side. Throughout our time, numerous capital punishment cases have sparked intense debates and raised numerous questions about the fairness and accuracy of the justice system. One such case is that of Frances Newton, a Texas woman who was executed despite serious doubts regarding her guilt. Today, we're going to go through this complex and controversial case and go through the circumstances surrounding her conviction and execution. Let's get into the case of Frances Newton right now on Love and Murder. Welcome, lambs. Welcome to a new episode of Love and Murder, your weekly true crime podcast telling you cases of heartbreak that turn to homicide. I am your host, Kai, and in today's episode, we're discussing a case of was she guilty, was she not guilty, and they executed her anyway. Before we begin, I want to say that this episode and all my episodes are sponsored by my lambs and Patreon, patreon.com/loveandmurder. Without your continued donations, this show just wouldn't be able to continue, so I want to thank you for that. If you're not a Patreon lamb, then be sure to subscribe to Love and Murder right now while you're listening so you don't miss a case. And if you didn't know, you can also subscribe on our Patreon, so you don't have to hear intros or commercials such as this, and you'll get Kyran's bonuses and be a sponsor of Love and Murder. You can also just sign up for free and see the free stuff that I put out. Patreon.com/loveandmurder. In the meantime, though, grab your butts, grab your BJ's apple juice, murderandlove.com/BJ's, and let's get into some Love and Murder. Frances Elaine Newton was born on April 12, 1965 in Harris County, Houston, Texas. I didn't know much about her early life because there's not much to be found, except that she married a man who she's known since they were little. And his name was Adrian Newton, and he was born in 1964. The two had two children, Alton, who was born in 1980, and Farah, who was born in 1985. So we are going to fast forward this to 1987. By this time, both of them are having extramarital affairs because the marriage isn't going really well. Adrian was into using drugs and sleeping around, and Frances, she was having her own extramarital affair as well. Adrian had started off smoking marijuana, but that had kind of increased to now he had a cocaine habit. Quote, he had told me he was using cocaine, but I'd never seen that, but I saw the effects of it. He was home later, he was irritable, less responsible, and this is a quote from Frances. Although he had a drug problem, and even though they both were seeing other people, she figured that they'd known each other for so long that she wanted to make things work. She didn't want to get a divorce. And on April 7th, 1987, her and Adrian sat down and had a talk about it. Quote, we had decided that we were going to get through this together. Adrian had told her that, he was going to stop using drugs. Matter of fact, he wasn't using it anymore. And, they just decided, okay, we're going to try and make this work. It is what it is. We have to make this work for our family. So once they finished talking, he went into the living room to, quote, to watch TV. I decided to be nosy and see if he was being honest, end quote. So after he went to watch TV, she went to open the cabinet where he kept his drugs. Quote, that's when I found the gun. And that's when she remembered a conversation that he'd had with his brother earlier. His brother Sterling had been staying with them, but that's when she remembered a conversation that he'd had earlier that day with his brother. Quote, I couldn't hear real close, but it sounded like they'd been in some trouble. I thought I'd better take the gun out of there because I didn't want it to be in the house. I didn't want him to get in trouble. So she took the gun and put it in a duffel bag and took it with her when she left the apartment around 6 p.m. because she had to go out and do some stuff. At 7 p.m., she got to her cousin Sandra Nelm's house, and they sat down and talked for a little while. And then after that, Frances went home. As she was leaving her cousin's house, she looked back because she was backing up the car and she saw the duffel bag on the seat. That's when she remembered, oh yeah, I needed to hide this gun. So she got the bag out of the car. Her cousin saw her because her cousin was watching her, back down the driveway. So her cousin saw her. She got the bag out of the back seat and walked next door to an abandoned house that was owned by her parents. And that's where she left the bag. They then both got in the car and went to Frances's apartment. So they got there around 8 p.m. She walked in the house, didn't see anything wrong, walked around. She saw her husband laying down and she thought he was sleeping, and then she saw blood. Quote, as Frances walked around the couch and saw his upper torso, she immediately screamed and bolted to the children's bedroom. Frances began to frantically scream uncontrollably. I could not calm her down enough to elicit the apartment's address. This was what her cousin said. When police arrived, she gave police as much information as she possibly could. She told police about Adrian's drug habit. She told police about the fact that she overheard the conversation with his brother, that he owed money to a drug dealer. She even told them that she had found a gun and removed it from her house because she didn't want a gun in her house. When police interrogated Adrian's brother, Terrence, he corroborated her story, telling them that, yeah, Adrian did owe a drug dealer money, and he even told them where the drug dealer lived. So she basically told them everything and didn't leave anything out, especially taking the gun out of the house, why she found the gun, how she knew about the gun, and everything like that. She had her cousin there who corroborated her story, Adrian's brother there who corroborated that part of the story. She doesn't sound like she left anything out to me. Police also noticed that the bullet had been lodged in Adrian's head and it was still there, meaning that with ballistics, the blood and brain matter would have blown back onto the gun and the shooter. So whoever shot him should have had blood sprayed all over them. They also confirmed this with a trail of blood that was found in the hallway. They also tested Frances's hands just to make sure, and they found no trace of residual nitrites, meaning gun residue, on her hands, nor on the long sleeves of the sweater she was wearing. Just for evidence, they went ahead and collected the clothes that she was wearing and went and got it tested for blood. When that came back, there was no trace of blood at all on any of the items she was wearing that day. So she's innocent. Let's go ahead and find a murderer. On April 21st, Frances went and filed a claim on the life insurance for her husband and her kids. And on April 22nd, she was arrested and charged with capital murder. Why? What did they found that was different than what we just went through? So moving forward in the case was going to trial. To the state, they said it was an open and shut case, Johnson. We don't need to review anything else. Quote, her case has been reviewed by every possible court. She killed her 2 children and her husband, and there is very, very strong evidence of that. End quote. What very strong evidence? We literally just went through everything. There was no blood on her. There was no blood on her clothes. We didn't find any other clothes that had blood on her. She had no gun residue on her hand because no matter how much you wash your hands, you're going to have a trace of gun residue in your hand. She had her cousin with her. His brother gave a statement. Like, what very, very strong evidence did you have? The prosecution's case against Frances was built around several key pieces of evidence. Number 1, Frances had the motives and the means to commit the murder, according to them. 3 weeks before the murders, Frances had purchased life insurance policies on her husband and daughter and herself. All of these were worth $50,000 each, and she named herself as beneficiary on her husband's and daughter's policies. I mean, who else would she name on there? When asked about her husband's signature on the policy, she said that she forged it to stop him from discovering that she had even set aside money to pay the premiums. So prosecutors jumped on that and said, Exhibit A, Your Honor. Like I said, this is a strong piece of evidence. This was her motive for murder. She wanted that insurance money. They said that even though she said she forged her husband's name to stop him from knowing that she was setting money aside to even pay for the premiums, what actually she was doing is that she forged her husband's signature to make sure that the policies would pay out to her. Motive. And I know, Your Honor, you're asking about the means. Well, she stole the .25 caliber Raven Arms pistol from her boyfriend's house, and that, Your Honor, was the murder weapon. She even admitted herself, Your Honor, to taking a gun out of the house and putting it in a relative's home after the murders. Her attorney, Ron Mock, admitted that he hadn't interviewed any prosecution witness or subpoenaed any defense witnesses. So he was just standing there. He was just there like, I'm just collecting a paycheck. I don't know. Do I have to ask you a question, Your Honor? Both Frances and her parents pleaded with the judge on numerous occasions to assign her a new attorney, but that request was denied. I mean, when you have an attorney literally just sitting on his hands doing nothing, not asking any questions, not cross-referencing, not doing any research, not doing anything at all, I mean, why wouldn't you allow them to get a different attorney? And I guess because it's a court-appointed attorney, they were just like, no, you just stick with who you got. But that's not their fault. And because of that, on October 25th, 1988, she was convicted, found guilty of the murders and sentenced to death for the capital murder of her 21-month-old daughter. And even though she maintained her innocence, and everything pointed towards her innocence, she spent nearly 17 years on death row. Now let's get into the part of the appeals and why she spent 17 years on death row. But before we go into that, let's get into a small commercial break. First of all, I want to thank you for being a listener to Love and Murder. And if you'd like to support me to keep the content flowing and get access to exclusive bonus episodes, you can join my Lamb Supporters Club today. I give you multiple ways to join this season, which you can join with Patreon, which is the best way, Spotify, and now my hosting, Spreaker. The link to each of these platforms is in the description below, which you can find right below the episode title on your preferred listening platform. As for Patreon, if you join Patreon, you do get videos, you get additional extras like case extras. So if there's pictures, evidence, crime scene photos, pictures of the murderer, pictures of the victim sometimes, whatever extras there are in the case, there's trial videos, there's interview videos, all of that is in my Patreon. You can get courtroom files and whatever else that I found of that particular case. All of that is in my Patreon. In Spotify and Spreaker, as of right now, I can't upload any of those things. So that's why the better best for you is Patreon. Patreon.com/Love and Murder. If you're not ready to sign up for Patreon, but do want to support Lamb in just, a one-off donation, you could definitely buy me a coffee, or as I say, buy me an apple juice. Just go to buymeacoffee.com/Love and Murder and donate whatever you want. There are other little ways you can support, like sharing this episode, giving a 5-star review, commenting, and so much more. Either way, your support makes a world of difference to me and to the Lamb platform on a whole, and I want to thank you for being part of the Lamb podcast journey. And now, back to the show. During the numerous appeals that went through, we get to find out even more of what was wrong with the case from the very beginning. So the first thing Frances did was she went ahead and hired the Texas Innocence Network at the University of Houston Law Center. Well, not hired, but researched them, reached out to them, and they took her case. Attorney David Dow, who was the head of the Texas Innocence Network at U of H, said, quote, "The state's theory is simple, and it is superficially compelling. As we will see, however, appearances can be misleading." This Texas Innocence Network, which we're now going to call her defense team, pointed out significant issues with the prosecution's case. First, they questioned the timeline that was proposed by the prosecutors, which in their timeline, it required Frances to have murdered her family, clean herself of all blood traces and gunshot residue, then drive out to her cousin's house, all within the span of less than 30 minutes. Number 2, Frances had suggested an alternative theory for the crime. She said that her family were likely killed by someone connected to a drug deal that Adrian owed money to, the $1,500 he owed. And they said, if you think about it, this theory would make sense because it would explain the lack of physical evidence on Frances. There was no gunshot residue on her hands or anywhere on her. There was no bloody clothes, everything like that. However, this theory was never even investigated, looked in, considered at all by prosecutors, police, or her own defense attorney, Roe Wilson. And when Attorney David asked Sheriff Officer Frank Pratt, quote, "To your knowledge, was the alleged drug dealer ever interviewed by anyone in connection with this case?" Officer Pratt said no. Number 3, I think I'm on number 3. Number 3 or number 4, either way. Her defense attorney raised questions about the supposed murder weapon. According to them, there were conflicting accounts as to whether a second gun had been found at the crime scene or not. They argued that if a second gun had indeed been found at the crime scene and not reported, then the wrong firearm could have been tested. For instance, on April 8th, which is the day after the murder, according to trial records, police supposedly confirmed that the gun that they had gotten from Frances's duffel bag in the abandoned building matched the murder bullets. And if you remember, this is the one that Frances said she told him about. So she told them that I took this out of the house, blah, blah, blah. However, even though they said that this matched the murder bullets, she wasn't arrested until more than 2 weeks later, and only after she tried to file that insurance claim. Now, Frances says that Harris County Sheriff Sergeant J.J. Freeze told her that police had actually recovered 2 guns. And she said this in a sworn affidavit. Frances's father, B. Henry Nelms, also said that that Sergeant Freeze told him the same thing, and also said that Sergeant Freeze said that Frances would, quote, be eventually released. Another thing is the Department of Public Safety forensic technicians had detected nitrite traces near the hem of Frances's long skirt, but they couldn't say with 100% certainty that these nitrites were not from her father's garden fertilizer, which her daughter had been in that day, and it could have definitely been transferred from her toddler daughter's hands to her mother's skirt. The only evidence they relied upon was the physical evidence, the supposed ballistics to match the gun that Frances had supposedly hidden. Well, to supposedly match the gun that Frances had hidden, which now we're seeing they found 2 guns. They found the gun that she had hidden, and apparently they found a gun at the scene. And which one did you test and which one matched? But they're only talking about the gun that they found that was hidden, that she told them about. And finally, and a big one, her court-appointed defense attorney, Ron Mock, was later barred from capital cases because of numerous charges of professional misconduct. And this was something that famously happened. So a lot of people know about this. So he wasn't even practicing law properly. And this was her defense attorney. Yet, even with all that evidence, they still kept her in prison. And she was scheduled to be executed on December 1st, 2004. However, 2 hours before this, Texas Governor Rick Perry granted a 120-day reprieve to allow more time to test forensic evidence in the case. Even though he said he saw no, quote, evidence of innocence legally, he did grant this 4-month stay to allow for retesting on the nitrite residue on the hem of her skirt and gun ballistics evidence. Now, if he saw no evidence of innocence, supposedly, why would you allow this? So far, everything that I'm seeing points to innocence, and y'all are just not listening. So her new defense team with the Innocence Project went about trying to get this skirt tested, but that ended up being impossible because the 1987 test that had previously been done had destroyed the nitrite particles on her skirt. And to top that off, the Harris County court officials had stored the skirt by putting it in the bag together with other items of the victim's bloody clothing. So they had it with her family stuff instead of separately as evidence. They just had it in one bag. So now it's completely worthless as evidence. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? You had one job, sir, ma'am, whoever put it in the bag. You had one job. Evidence goes in the evidence bag, and then the victim's clothing goes in another bag. And you would have sectioned off the victim's clothing separately as well. You just dumped it all in one bag. So they went on to the second round of ballistic testing. And supposedly this confirmed a match between the gun prosecutors say that Frances used and the bullets that killed her family. However, that match may not actually be considered correct evidence because there's no certain connection between the gun and Frances. And then we go back to the reports as to whether or not a second gun, and in some reports, even a third, was ever recovered from the scene. And by the way, this evidence about the second gun, it was never revealed to Frances's defense attorney. But then again, Attorney Ron never tried to do any of his due diligence either. It's only the Innocence Project who found this out. Attorney David argued that, quote, it's virtually impossible to know whether prosecutors have been truthful in claiming that the gun that Frances admits to hiding on April 7th, 1987 was the murder weapon. Quote, how many firearms were recovered and investigated in this case and who owned them? How many records have been withheld from Frances's attorney throughout this case? And then, on top of that, while they're still trying to run all these new tests, and I mean, I guess they can't run the tests on the skirt anymore, but at least while they're trying to do the ballistics test and trying to find this second gun and reports of this second gun, a relative of Frances, who had been jailed shortly after the murders, claimed that the person he was in jail with and shared a cell with, he said he killed the family. So he was running around telling everybody in jail that he's the one who killed the family. Then 3 members of the convicting jury, as well as numerous other individuals, started expressing concern over evidence that was not presented during the trial. So now everybody doubts if Frances is actually guilty. Like, I want to say everybody outside of the Texas law at that time. Adrian's parents, they thought she was innocent. 2 former prison officials, they thought she was innocent. Quote, "We never wanted to see Frances get executed. When the trial occurred, nobody from the DA's office ever asked our opinion. We were willing to testify on Frances's behalf, but Frances's defense lawyer never approached us. We do not wish to suffer the loss of another family member." This was a quote from Adrian's parents, Tom and Virginia Lewis. So her attorneys put in another motion of a stay of execution on August 24th, 2005, and the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals denied it. And then on September 9th, they turned down another appeal for a motion of stay. Then on September 12th, the Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles voted 7-0 not to recommend that her sentence be commuted to life in prison, even though the Innocence Project brought forth this evidence, this doubt, the letter from Adrian's parents asking that her life be spared. And that same day, the United States Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit refused an appeal of her sentence. Then Attorney David asked Governor Perry for 30 more days to prove that she was wrongly linked to the murder weapon. And on September 13th, the Supreme Court of the United States declined without dissent 2 appeals. And then on September 14th, 2005, even though there was so much doubt, so much controversy, even though her attorney didn't do anything, her initial attorney didn't do anything, and he was famously barred from doing any more capital cases, even though they never confirmed about 2 guns, although that was something that was a huge doubt, even though there was no evidence of the blood splatter that they're saying should be there, of the gun residue on her hands, there's only nitrite particles on the hem of her skirt. Even through all of that, on November 14th, 2005, like I said, Frances Newton was executed by lethal injection. With this execution, she became the first Black woman to be executed in Texas since the Civil War, and the 3rd woman, period, executed in Texas since Texas resumed capital punishment in 1982. Wow. Before she was executed, she made no final statement and did not have a last meal request. She was just probably broken because she comes home to this horror, this trauma, and everything's put on her. The blame has been put on her. And if she didn't do it, she just faced all this time unable to heal. She had no time to grieve, no time to go through any of this when she's fighting for her life, trying to get people to believe she's innocent. And then she was murdered, basically. I'm not even going to say lethal injection. If she was innocent, then this was murder. This was complete murder. Now, shouldn't you be if you're going to do capital punishment, shouldn't you be 100% certain that you have the right person? Like you have covered every single base there is to cover ever before you put somebody to capital punishment? And since this 1988 conviction, the question of the second gun has always been at the forefront of this case, even though she is already dead. And in more recent news about the Houston PD crime lab, more recent as in after Frances was executed, the Houston PD crime lab has been repeatedly charged with incompetent, messed up work, resulting in a number of exonerations and the discreditation of the lab, which had been under investigation. For instance, in October 2009, city officials acknowledged that nearly 4,000 rape kits and other crime evidence remained untested for DNA. So it was literally just sitting there. According to the HPD crime lab director at that time, Irma Rios, the untested evidence that was stored in the property room included backlogs of 1,048 active cases where police investigators had asked for DNA testing. The evidence was from cases involving burglaries, homicides, and sexual assaults. And in a lot of cases that were deemed no longer active, officials had said if you used the results now, it wouldn't be useful. For example, some evidence in rape cases were gathered way too late after the crime happened. And in 2002, this was the first time the HPD's crime lab's DNA section was closed, when evidence of misconduct and negligence had first been revealed. At that time, a 2-year independent audit of the lab found hundreds of cases with testing problems, and this ended up raising questions for the defendants who were convicted based on the test results from the lab. At that time, 3 wrongful convictions based on the faulty testing had been overturned by the DNA testing in recent years. Then the DNA lab was closed in January of 2008 after the investigation revealed that the DNA director had helped employees cheat on routine proficiency tests. This is just some information that I found during my research into the Houston Police Department crime lab. And this is the same crime lab that executed Frances based on, quote, their ballistic testing, based on the, quote, evidence of the nitrites on her skirt. And later, during a brief videotaped interview with Assistant DA Roe Wilson, they inadvertently did confirm the existence of a second gun. Quote, police recovered a gun from the apartment that belonged to the husband. It had not been fired. It had not been involved in the offense. It was simply a gun Adrian had there, so there is no second gun theory. Which, if you think about it, that was confirming the existence of a second gun. So you got the gun that was from the apartment that Frances said that she hid, which was the gun that was from the apartment, and you agreed that it had never been fired. So there was a second gun. That one had been fired. I don't know, were you saying this as proof as to why she was guilty? Because you literally just said she wasn't guilty. That statement literally just said she wasn't guilty. Of course, Assistant DA Wilson and her boss, DA Chuck Rosenthal, quickly retracted this admission. She went on record and told the Houston Chronicle that she'd simply, quote, misspoken. Then DA Rosenthal accused David of fabricating the idea of a second gun. Quote, one gun was recovered in this case. And then the Court of Criminal Appeals agreed, saying that, quote, the evidence in this case was more than sufficient to establish Frances's guilt. The various details that Frances suggests her trial counsel should have investigated in greater detail do not detract from a single crucial piece of evidence that concerns her. She disposed of the murder weapon immediately after the killing. You know, the more I go on, the more I believe she was innocent. Then David and his law students found out more information. They found out in separate affidavits, 2 police officers who recalled tracing firearms recovered in connection with the murders. Officer Frank Pratt told one of David's students that he was assigned a gun found in the abandoned house, which he traced to Frances's boyfriend's cousins who bought it at a local Montgomery ward. He also said that the purchaser had also bought, quote, a second identical gun, but he didn't follow up with the second gun because, quote, he felt there was no need to do so. He also said he'd written up a report on the gun, and Frances's attorney had never even come to look at the report, so they'd never seen it. However, Frances's attorneys do have a police report written up by Detective M. Paranillo, who reported that he had traced another gun recovered in connection with the case to a purchase from rebel distributors in Humble, Texas, which he said had also ended up with Frances's boyfriend. Quote, the question arises, what recovered firearm was Pratt investigated? Counsel does not have access to the Harris County Sheriff's Department's records in this case. A record made directly to that institution for all records in connection to its investigation. A request made directly to that institution for all records in connection to its investigation of this offense was rejected. So basically, with all this said, the gun evidence is obviously incomplete, and we have no way of knowing which gun was in fact the murder weapon and which gun was delivered for ballistic tests in 1987 or for the second ballistics test. And that is what the prosecution relied heavily on for admission of guilt. And surprisingly, they wouldn't let them see the reports of either one of these ballistic tests. As for attorney Ron Mock, when Frances and her parents begged the judge to allow her to change attorneys, and Mock admitted to the judge that he hadn't talked to any prosecution witness, neither that nor subpoenaed any defense witness, the judge did initially grant the motion to remove him, but he declined the continuance. So Frances had to go ahead and go to trial with Mock. She said, quote, "It was stunning. Mock gets on the stand and says, 'I don't know anything.' And then the judge was just like, okay, it was stunning." And like I said, Mock was then barred from any capital cases, and he had been brought before the disciplinary board at least 5 times on different charges of professional misconduct. With all those times, he had either been fined or suspended. And at one point, he was completely suspended from practicing law until late 2007. They just suspended him until 2007. If they let him back in, that's crazy. And Frances's mother, Jewel Nelms, said that District Attorney Wilson's admission was no mistake, even though she said it was a misstatement. That's what Wilson said, remember? Jewel said, quote, "I've known all the time that there was a second gun. So I want to say again to Roe Wilson, I thank you very much for letting us know, indeed, that there's someone down there that knows about the second gun and was willing to talk about it, even though I know it wasn't her intention to do it." And that is the horrible, questionable, shocking case of Frances Newton, someone who, for all intents and purposes, appeared to be completely innocent, and she was executed anyway due to just, I said so. Literally, that's it. I said so. Not me, but them. There was no evidence pointing to her doing it. There was no evidence pointing to her guilt. Nobody really conducted an investigation. The trial was just like, meh, okay, I said so. Her lawyer was like, "I don't know anything, and I am refusing to work. Just pay me." And literally, the prosecution was like, "Open and shut case, Johnson. We don't have to do any more work here. Investigation? Pfft. Blood residue not being on her? Pfft. Open and shut case." And that was it. And then, without a thought and without remorse, they just went ahead and executed her. And still to this day, people are talking about this case and trying to find out if this woman was wrongly convicted or not, to the point where a DA, quote, misspoke, even though she literally just told the truth. So what do y'all think about this case? What do y'all think about the death penalty when it comes to questionable cases such as this one? For the poll question, I'm going to put out, based on everything that I just told you, do you think Frances Newton was guilty or innocent? And that's what I'll put out. Innocent or guilty, that's all you have to answer. And other than that, I want to hear from you. And speaking of hearing from you, let's go ahead and read, I guess not last week, but week before. Let's read your comments and go over your poll answers. So the week before, the episode was about Davy Albarran's daughters who hunted him down because he was a rapist and a pedophile. So the question was, if you found out that one of your parents was a pedophilic rapist, would you turn them in? And 100% of y'all said, of course. The options were, of course, no, would find another option, or honestly, I don't know. Because that is a hard question to ask. And I'm not judging you because that is a hard thing to swallow. That's your parent. Like, oh my God. So if you didn't know, you didn't know. But 100% of y'all said, of course. And my lamb, TT Live Life, I'm not going to say your name, said, "It's crazy that some family members helped this guy out. I'd have told him he could stay and then called the cops. He didn't think about how his actions would forever affect his granddaughter. Just sad." And I agree with you, TT. I'd have been like, yeah, I can help you. And then I'd have stayed and called the cops too. I freaking agree with you. Stacey Adams said, "Great episode. Yep, turning them in." And then Juliet Hedrick said it's hard to say if she would turn her parents in. So basically she chose C, which is I don't know, which is completely fine. Hannah Page said, I haven't talked to my parents for years, so if this ever came out, I would gladly take the chance to throw them in jail. To which I said, damn. There's so much to unpack there, but I don't want to get into people's business. But damn. Nah, I hear you. That's a hard question. And I mean, if I knew, one of my parents was running around being a rapist and a pedophile and just ruining people's life, yeah, more than likely I'm calling the police. I'm turning them in. How else are you going to stop them? It's going to continue happening. Even if I say something to them, they might just learn to be more sneaky with it. You know what I'm saying? But I don't know. I don't think I could live with myself knowing that I'm allowing that to continue going forward. And that is all that I have for you today. Oh, that's right. And I had put out a poll asking y'all if you wanted to continue forward with weekly full episodes, or should we do it bi-weekly, or should we just stop the full episodes altogether? So I had mixed answers. The mixed answers that I got were to continue with the weekly, and the other half said, let's do bi-weekly. And I know I can't do these full episodes weekly. I mean, it'll still be the full episode. You'll still get your Tuesday mini, your Wednesday mini, and your Friday mini. It was just a full episode. I was asking y'all if I should continue on weekly. So I know I will not be able to do this by myself weekly, the full episodes. So instead of having the podcast crash and burn, which is going to happen if I continue trying to do the full episodes by myself, I'm going to meet y'all halfway. So what I'm going to do is full episodes will be bi-weekly, but on the week that full episodes are not coming out, I'll still put out a mini episode. So you'll still get your Sunday episode. We're not going to skip Sunday, but it's just going to be one full, one mini, one full, one mini, like that, until I get to a point where I can get some help, and then I can just go back to full. So we won't miss Sundays at all. It'll just be alternating full and mini. That's what we're going to do. That's what I can keep up with for now. And I do thank you for your patience, and I do thank you for listening, and I do thank you for your support, and I do thank you for listening to me, complaining on this platform, because y'all don't have to listen to any of that. Y'all can say, this woman is crazy. I don't want to hear her. I don't know her from Jack or Jalen, and just, go ahead and close out of my podcast, but you don't. So I do want to thank you for your support. What I try to do with my lambs is to be as open with y'all as I possibly can and let y'all know what's going on in my head and with the show, and let y'all make the decisions as to how you want to see it move forward. And in negotiating back and forth between me and my lambs, we can make this show the best show for you. So I hope we're almost there. Anyways, that's all I have for you today. And before we close out, don't forget to go ahead and share this episode with all of your friends, your social media, everything like that. This actually helps me out. It is something that you could do really, really quickly. So on whatever platform you're on, go ahead and get that share icon. Just click on it right now and share it to your WhatsApp, share it to your Instagram, share it to your Facebook, share it to your Twitter. I don't know if people use Twitter/X anymore. Share it to Reddit. Share, 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 share. And as I end each full episode, I want to remind you that it's, say it with me now, all love and no murder, y'all. Bye.